Yo, what's going on guys, Camille here. In this video I'm going to be showing you guys how to build Chongyun. Without further ado, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. So first of all, I just want to explain the ways that you can build Chongyun in. There are mainly like 3 or technically 2 ways that you can build Chongyun in. First of all, a main DPS build. In the main DPS build, Chongyun is a Claymore user and he can apply cryo very fast. So the best build for him is that we're going to need another Hydro enabler and you're going to have a freeze shatter team. So you're going to freeze the enemies with Chongyun and the Hydro enabler, and then you shatter the enemies, and that's gonna result in a lot of damage. That's generally the way you'd want to build Chongyun in as a main DPS. Next thing you have is a sub DPS slash nuke build. In that build, you're gonna need Chongyun to do a lot of damage with his elemental burst. This is pretty much the only thing you're gonna need. You'd want to make a team where he can do a lot of damage with his elemental burst. You're gonna need a pyro enabler so you can reverse melt his elemental burst and do more damage and stuff like that. So yeah, that's pretty much it for a nuke slash sub DPS Chongyun. Now you can also use him as like a support or like a cryo enabler, but that's not really a build, that's just like a role. You're just gonna build him the same way as a sub DPS build, but you're just gonna use like different teams and different ways of using him. So yeah, mainly the 2 roles for Chongyun are gonna be a main DPS build and a sub DPS build. Alright, so now let's move on to his talent priorities. So for a DPS build, you'd want to upgrade Chongyun's auto attacks first, because you're going to be obviously using them a lot, and then you'd want to upgrade your elemental burst and then your elemental skill. Obviously, if you're using them as a main DPS, you'd want to upgrade all of his talents. You don't want to like leave big gaps between them. For a sub DPS slash nuke build, you'd want to upgrade your elemental burst first and then your elemental skill. So yeah, that's it. Pretty simple. So now moving on to his constellations, we're going to see which ones are good and worth it and for what, and which ones are not good. So the first constellation is that when you end your normal attacks rotation, it's going to give you 3 extra hits of cryo damage. That's going to be around like 150% attack in total. It's a cool damage increase if you're using them as a main DPS. For a sub DPS build, it's not really going to matter, but for a main DPS build, it's going to be pretty good. His attack multipliers are generally pretty low, so it's much needed if you're using them as a main DPS. So for sub DPS Chongyun, C1 is useless, but for main DPS Chongyun, it's very good. I would say it's kind of like necessary even. C2 is that if you use another character's elemental bursts or skills inside of Chongyun's like circle, they're gonna have their cooldowns decreased by 15%. Very good supportive constellation if you're using them as a support or sub DPS or whatever. Yeah, I'd say it's worth it. It's a pretty cool constellation. C3 is gonna increase the level of your elemental burst. Pretty good for both DPS Chongyun and sub DPS Chongyun. So yeah, I'd say C3 is worth it. C4 is that he's gonna generate 1 energy every time he hits an opponent affected by cryo, and it can only occur once every 2 seconds. Honestly, I'd say it's kind of meh. Chongyun doesn't really have that big of energy problems in the first place, and also the energy from this constellation is not really something big. So yeah, I'd say C4 is not really worth it, and it's also kind of like expensive. C5 is gonna increase the level of your elemental skill. That's basically just gonna give you a little bit more damage and more cryo uptime. It's pretty good for a main DPS Chongyun, but keep in mind it's gonna cap out at 3 seconds, the infusion duration, so it's not really that much. Honestly, I would say C5 is meh. I wouldn't really recommend going for C5. Oh yeah, and by the way, I just want to explain what is the infusion duration for Chongyun. I see a lot of people kind of confused about it. I did explain it before, but since this is a guide, we're gonna repeat it. So you can see guys that the infusion duration is gonna be like 2 seconds at level 1. Basically what is this is that's not like your total time for Chongyun's infusion. That's the time after you leave Chongyun's circle that your weapon is gonna be still infused. So you're gonna have a total of like 10 seconds of field duration, and then you're gonna have an extra 2 seconds after the skill ends. Or like when you leave the circle, you're gonna have an extra 2 seconds. So yeah, that's the infusion in Chongyun's skill. C6 is that more damage to opponents with lower percentage max HP than Chongyun, and 1 additional Spirit Blade. That's basically just more damage for your elemental burst for Chongyun. Very good damage increase, pretty good for a DPS build and also sub DPS build, but I mean it's C6, so yeah, you decide. So yeah, first constellations, I'd recommend going for C1 if you're using them as a main DPS. I'd honestly say it's kind of necessary. Without C1, his normal attacks are gonna be like kind of weak. Other than that, all of the other constellations are like up to you. They're pretty cool. Each one of them is gonna add in something, but they're not really necessary. Alright, so now moving on to his weapons. The weapons from his sub DPS and main DPS builds are not really going to be that much different, so we're just going to do them at the same time. So his top weapons are going to be obviously the 5 stars. His best in slot is probably going to be the Wolf's Gravestone. You have the Unforged is going to be pretty good too. Even the Song of Broken Pines is going to be pretty usable too. The Skyward is going to be pretty good too, especially for a sub DPS Chongyun. You're going to need that energy recharge. And even the Red Horn is going to be kind of usable. It's going to have a low base attack and like a semi-useless passive, but it's gonna have a huge substat, which is pretty good for Chongyun. It's also crit damage, so he's gonna need that. So pretty much all of the 5-star weapons are gonna be pretty good on Chongyun. Now for the 4-star options, there are a lot actually. So you can use the crit weapons, the Blackcliff, and the Serpent Spine. The Serpent Spine depends on what kind of build. If you're using them in like a perma-freeze build, in that case the Serpent Spine is gonna be less valuable because you're not really gonna need crit rate. But in like a reverse melt build, the Serpent Spine is gonna be pretty good. The Blackcliff Slasher is going to be pretty consistent. It's always pretty good. You can use the Prototype Arcake. It's a very good free-to-play weapon. You can use the Luxurious Sea Lord. It's a very good weapon on Chongyun too. The Akumaru is going to be pretty good too. The Katsuragikiri is going to be pretty good too. The Lithic Blade is also going to be pretty good. All of these weapons are going to be very, very good options on Chongyun. There are also other options that are viable. For example, the Sacrificial is going to increase your elemental skills uptime. I mean, Chongyun already kind of have like pretty good uptime on his elemental skill, but if you want to maximize it, you can go with the Sacrificial. It's also going to give you energy recharge, so for a sub DPS build, it's going to be pretty good. You can also use the Rain Slasher mainly for elemental mastery. The passive is pretty much useless, but elemental mastery is going to be pretty good on Chongyun for a melt build or a shatter build. So I wouldn't really recommend it, but it's a viable option for Chongyun too. If you don't have any of those weapons, even though a lot of them are free to play, you can go with the 3-star Debate Club, but make sure you change it along the way because there are a lot of like free and better weapons that are going to be much better. Alright, so now moving on to his artifact sets. So if you're using Chongyun as a main DPS, in that case the best set is going to be a 4-piece Blizzard Strayer. It's also going to work too on a sub DPS build, so yeah, the 4-piece Blizzard is going to be pretty good on Chongyun, but it's only going to work on like freeze teams. So if you're using them in like a reverse melt team or any team other than freeze, it's not really going to be that good. In that case, you can use something like a 2-piece Blizzard and then a 2-piece attack %. Or if you want to focus more on his elemental burst, you can use a 2-piece Blizzard and then a 2-piece Noblesse. Another option that's going to be viable for sub DPS Chongyun is going to be a 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. It's not really the best one since we're not really going to be stacking energy recharge on Chongyun, but it's going to be viable. It's also going to give you some extra energy recharge, which is pretty cool. Now moving on to his artifact stats. For the main stats, it's pretty simple. You just want attack % or elemental mastery on your sands, cryo damage bonus in your goblet, then crit rate or crit damage on your circlet. So for your sands, if you don't have enough elemental mastery and you're using them in like a freeze shatter team or in a reverse melt team, in that case you should go elemental mastery on your sands. Other than that, attack % is going to be the better option. For your circlet, if you're using them in a freeze team, then go crit damage. If you're using them in any other team, you can see which one you lack and then go for it on your circlet, either crit rate or crit damage. For the substats, you just want crit rate or crit damage, attack %, energy recharge, and maybe some elemental mastery. Now for the final stats you'd want to have on your Chongyun, crit rate you'd want it to set around 50 to 70%. If you're using them in a freeze team with the 4-piece Blizzard, you don't need to worry about crit rate. Other than that, 50 to 70% is the way to go. Crit damage 100 to 140%, even more if you can. Energy recharge, I'd say around 120 to 140% is gonna be enough. His burst isn't really that expensive, so around that is gonna be good. And finally, for elemental mastery, you'd want it to set around 100 to 200. You don't want to neglect elemental mastery, especially in a shatter freeze team or a melt team, because in a freeze shatter team you're gonna be freezing enemies and then shattering them with Chongyun. When you shatter the enemies, you're gonna have like this white damage. This white damage is gonna be increased with your elemental mastery and your level, and you don't want to neglect the shatter damage. It's gonna contribute a lot to your total damage. Also, don't mind my Chongyun, he's not really built at all. He's level 50. I'm just trying to use him so you guys understand. And obviously in a melt team, you're going to be reverse melting your elemental burst, and that's going to multiply your damage. So you definitely don't want to sleep on elemental mastery. I'd say just get a couple of substats, maybe 100 to 200, and you're good. If you fail to get enough substats, in that case, you might be forced to go for a elemental mastery sands. Alright, so now moving on to his team comps. So starting off with a DPS team comp for Chongyun. For a main DPS build, you just want to use him in a freeze shatter team and that's it. For that, you're gonna need Chongyun and then a second cryo and a hydro enabler. And then a flex support. So a team example for that is gonna be Chongyun and then like a hydro enabler, for example, Xingqiu or Mona. And then a second cryo support for the cryo resonance, for example, Diona or Shinha or whatever. And then a last support, you should probably use someone with the Verdescent, for example, Kazuha or Sucrose or whatever. Now for a sub DPS slash nuke Chongyun, there are a lot of other teams. You're basically using Chongyun to do damage with this elemental burst, so you can pretty much slap him at any team. But there are a lot of like preferable teams. For example, the national team, obviously one of the most like famous teams for Chongyun. You have Chongyun, Xingqiu, Xiangling, and then Bennett. There is not really much that Chong is going to be doing on this team. You're just going to be using this elemental burst to do damage. That's it. You can also use him as like a cryo enabler for another pyro to melt. One of the best characters that works with that is going to be D-Luke. So a team example is just going to be D-Luke, Chongyun, and then let's say Bennett or Xiangling and then Sucrose. You just want to like one hit with D-Luke inside of Chongyun's elemental skill and then like one hit and then use D-Luke's elemental skill. He's going to be a pretty good cryo enabler and he's going to be helping your D-Luke melt his hits. And then you want to use Chongyun's elemental burst when you have it ready. Obviously you have D-Luke, so you'd want to apply pyro and then reverse melt Chongyun's elemental burst. He's also going to help your D-Luke have less cooldown. Finally, you can also use him as like a support and also as like a sub DPS on the same team. He's going to work on that for characters who want to be cryo DPSs, but they cannot deal cryo on a full uptime. And they also use their auto attacks. For example, cryo DPS Kea or cryo DPS Rosaria or any character who wants to be a cryo DPS with his normal attacks. So we're going to have Kea or Rosaria or whatever, then Chongyun and then say Sucrose and then a hydro enabler like Mona or Xingqiu or whatever. So it's just a normal freeze team for a main DPS who cannot really deal cryo consistently. So yeah, these are the main teams for Chongyun. As I said, you can pretty much use him in any team as a sub DPS. If you're not using his elemental skill because it's gonna mess up a lot of teams. But for his elemental burst, you can just use him at any team. Switch to him when his elemental burst is ready, cast it, and then leave. So yeah, I hope this video helped. If it did, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and see y'all in the next video. Peace.